My name is Joelle Lightbound, chair of the committee today.
Of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 26, 2022. The committee is meeting to study fraudulent calls in Canada. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sous forme.
Today's meeting will be in hybrid form, pursuant to the order of June 23rd, 2022. My apologies for being here in hybrid format. I would rather be there in person, but it was impossible for me today. But we have the pleasure of having several witnesses today in person from the RCMP, represented by Denis Baudouin, Director of Financial Crime, Guy-Paul Larocque, Acting Officer in Charge, Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, and Chris Linam, Director General, National Cybercrime Coordination. They will be here for the first hour, and for the second hour as individuals, we have Randall Barron-Chong, co-founder of Canadian SIM Swap Victims United, Kevin Cosgrove, digital safety educator and civilian advisor, and finally, John Metcher, retired RCMP fraud investigator. And my apologies if I mispronounced any of your names. I am doing my best. And now I will give the floor to the RCMP for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, it is my honour to join you today to discuss the prevalence of fraudulent calls and other scams in Canada and the efforts that the RCMP has undertaken since we last spoke to you on this topic in May 2020. I'm Director General Chris Linam, responsible for the National Cybercrime Coordination Unit, the NC3, and the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, CAFC, at the RCMP. Joining me today is Sergeant Guy-Paul Larocque, Acting Officer in Charge of CAFC, and Superintendent Denis Baudouin, Director of Financial Crimes within Federal Policing Criminal Operations. Before discussing fraudulent calls and other scams impacting Canadians, I would like to briefly outline the mandate of the CAFC and NC3. First, the CAFC includes a long-standing partnership between the RCMP, the Ontario Provincial Police, and Competition Bureau Canada. The CAFC works closely with Canadian and international law enforcement partners to combat mass marketing fraud and other types of fraud, including fraudulent calls. In 2021, the CAFC aligned its operations with the NC3, another national police service that the RCMP focused on combating cybercrime. Whereas the CAFC focuses on fraud and online scams, the NC3 focuses more on combating technology as target cybercrime, such as ransomware, data breaches, and other cyber intrusions. The CAFC and NC3 work closely given the strong links between fraud and cybercrime and to provide highly coordinated services to the Canadian and international law enforcement community. Since our last committee appearance in 2020, the CAFC and NC3 have seen a significant increase in fraudulent activity in Canada. The CAFC in 2021, the CAFC received reports of $379 million in fraud losses from victims, a historic year in reported fraud losses, and a 130% increase compared to the previous year. At the same time, CAFC estimates that only 5 to 10% of victims actually report fraud to law enforcement. Of the reported fraud losses from victims in 2021, more than 70% were cyber-enabled, meaning that the fraudulent activity was committed via the internet or related digital platforms such as email or social media. These trends and the convergence of cyber-enabled fraud with other cybercrime activity underscores the importance of collaboration between the CAFC and the NC3 and the need for Canadian law enforcement to continually adapt and keep pace. Despite the rise in online scams, Canadians continue to be targeted by fraudulent calls at the same time. En 2021, la CAFC a reçu plus de 32 000 rapports où la victime a été contactée par téléphone par le fraudeur.
By telephone by the frauder. Fraudulent phone calls can include criminals' attempts to pretend to be for institutions or such as the CRA.
And apprehend fraudsters and cyber criminals. Oftentimes, we are dealing with thousands of victims, multiple policing jurisdictions, cybercrime infrastructure, and digital evidence in foreign countries. En réponse, ces défis.
These have also been a challenge, but have been helping us learn. We have adapted to problems. We have sped up our efforts to collaborate with our partners, and all of this at the same time as adopting a more global approach as we fight against fraud and cybercrime. The RCMP has a variety of programs that have supported the international fight against cybercrime and fraud. Nevertheless, we recognize that fraud is an omnipresent challenge, and it continues to be. Arrests will not be the only way to respond to this problem. We need to take a more global approach.
Possible, we work closely with domestic and international partners to assist with recovery of victim funds attributable to fraud. In 2021, the CAFC assisted in 36 instances of freezing or recovering funds totaling approximately $3.4 million. Another key aspect to combating fraud and cybercrime is prevention, outreach, and awareness building. It is a happy coincidence that I'm here able to speak to you during Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October. A key theme to our prevention activities this month includes awareness and prevention material about phishing techniques used by fraudsters. Our prevention efforts are ongoing throughout the year, with another notable month in March focused on fraud prevention. Last year for Fraud Prevention Month, we focused on outreach, awareness, and awareness against impersonation scams. In conclusion, our efforts over the past few years have been significant, insufficient but significant, and we remain committed to find new ways to protect Canadians and reduce victimization associated with fraud and cybercrime. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Linam. I'll now turn it over to MP Michael Cram for 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I guess I should start by saying thank you to for all the work that the RCMP does. I think politicians and the public at large often take for granted the difficulty, the job that law enforcement has, and so certainly I want to express my thanks for all the work that you do. Telemarketing fraud, a difficult issue. I was wondering if you could walk us through, if you are investigating an incident of telemarketing fraud, how do you go about doing that when the perpetrators are located in Canada versus in foreign countries?
Well, it may not differ that greatly to other types of investigation. If the suspects are in Canada, we're going to utilize a vast tools at our disposal, including, production order, search warrants, and different other tools. Where people are located outside of Canada, then we need partnerships, and we need to request assistance from foreign government, and oftentimes that creates delay. So that's the main difference. There's other differences, but I think that would be the main difference is that if you're seeking evidence located outside of Canada, then you're going to need assistance from a foreign jurisdiction.
And can you elaborate on how your cooperation with foreign jurisdictions has been going? Does it generally function well? Does it generally run into roadblocks?
Well, I'm sure you would understand that it's very dependent on which country you need assistance from. So we have a very strong relationship with close allies country, whereas other countries, it's more difficult. Of course, any type of assistance for evidence goes through Department of Justice and then the Department of Justice of the foreign jurisdiction. There's a process in place, but some of the, sometimes we're not able to get evidence we seek because from a lack of collaboration or willingness from the other country to collaborate. So, when we talk about complexity, it's definitely, one that is comes at the forefront.
So when the committee studied this issue 2 years ago, one of the recommendations in the report was that cooperation in terms of telemarketing fraud be part of future free trade agreements. And when we had the CRTC here last week, the witnesses indicated that maybe frameworks or agreements outside of free trade agreements with foreign countries would be more productive. I was wondering if the witnesses could share their thoughts about what future frameworks or agreements could be entered into between Canada and foreign countries to reduce this problem.
Yeah, I'll answer that. I won't necessarily say if there's new frameworks. I can talk about some of the measures that exist now. So a lot, as Superintendent Beaudoin mentioned, is there's both the domestic piece and then the international cooperation piece of it. So that's a big piece of what the mandate of the CAFC and NC3 is about working with law enforcement partners domestically and then linking those efforts where possible to international efforts. And that could be bilaterally with other countries, but also multilateral. So a good example on the cybercrime space is we work quite a bit with the European Cybercrime Center, and they have a specific group called the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force, where 18 member states of Europol plus some third-party, Canada and the US and Australia, they, out of Europol headquarters, they are in contact daily trying to work these international investigations together. And so that is a great example of how collaboration at the multilateral level can lead to further investigations and if not, to arrest or prosecute cyber criminals and fraudsters to go after their infrastructure. And there's been quite a few successes on that front.
If Canada were to pursue future agreements with countries that we don't have agreements with yet, could you recommend some countries that should be at the top of our list?
I'm not sure I would recommend countries. I think we would continue to try and deepen the relationships we have with some of the key ones that are working together. As I mentioned, a lot of the European countries, our Five Eyes allies, such as the US, UK, New Zealand, Australia. Those are the ones where we are really working closely on a lot of these international files.
All right. And what percentage of the problem would you say is contained 100% within Canada, and what percentage of the incidents are based in foreign countries?
This one is difficult to draw a specific number to it, just because for the vast majority of scam operations, they'll try to work over many different jurisdictions, right? Criminals, the way that they operate into that sphere is that they will operate from point A, likely targeting victim in point B, and then move the money to point C. So we often see that when we look at data from the Anti-Fraud Center. So to say specifically what it is operating from the country, yes, we're aware that there's scam operations originating from the country, but there's also many scam operations to targeting Canadian that comes from outside, from all over the world. So it can be difficult to put a specific number, but what I can tell you is that, I mean, by far, Canadians are already being targeted by scam operations, and I mean, losses that we see with reports at the Anti-Fraud Center speaks to that.
And when it comes to...
Mr. Cram, this is all the time you had. I'm
okay.
sorry. Thank you very much. We'll now turn it over to MP Dung for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I also want to thank all the witnesses for coming today. Good morning. The last report was 2 years ago, and technology has evolved quite a bit on the criminal side or foster side. And could you describe to the committee what have you done to keep up those technology advancements?
Yeah, sure. So part of our approach is, well, part of the challenges you mentioned is that you're dealing with very highly adaptive people, and they're criminals. So they can very easily pivot to adopt the newest technique or figure out what technique works. For example, they will watch what's happening in terms of an incident or a government type rebate, and very quickly they'll be able to figure out how to go and put that scam pitch out to Canadians. So they're adapting technology to enable that as well. And as we talked about, we now think over 70% of the activity is cyber enabled. At the same time, so we're working with law enforcement across the country to either help them build or acquire software or share best practices in techniques. There's some things out there now that if we keep training on in terms of techniques and what have you, then we're going to be better prepared. So it's a little bit of they move the yardsticks, and then we have to keep moving the yardsticks down the field as well.
Yeah, feels like you're forever trying to catch up to their technology and their methods. Do you have any number, like stats on how many arrests have you made in the last 2 years in Canada?
We don't collect that in terms of what the units represented here. I know Statistics Canada releases regular crime stats on the prevalence of fraud and cybercrime. In some cases, that trend is increasing, and the cyber-enabled that has increased year to year. One of the additional aspects that we don't just focus on the arrests or charges or convictions is we try and look at a holistic approach of how to reduce victimization. So in some cases that could be recovery efforts to help people freeze or recover the money, what I mentioned. Other efforts to work with different service providers. So if we come across infrastructure or web domains or websites that we think are being used by fraudsters, we reach out to those service providers to say, hey, we think fraudsters are using this, and they can then take action to take those offline and what have you. And then we also focus, as I mentioned, a lot on the prevention side. So we really focus on a holistic approach to tackling and reducing that level of victimization.
If you can provide to the committee on the actual numbers of arrests and how many convictions as in resulting of these arrests will be, I think that'd be very telling, that'd be very helpful. So if you can later on figure out that and submit to the committee, I really appreciate that. But in terms of method, it sounds to me that you are more focused on the prevention and loss recovery as opposed to investigate and catch the criminals, because if the criminals are out there, they're going to find different ways and victimize more people, right? So that perhaps is part of the reason why to the public we always feel like we're trying to catch up to these technology, to these criminal methods. Change of channel. Last week we heard from CRTC that telecom industries or companies they feed data like bulk data to them, they report to them. But do you feel that there is a challenge on information sharing between CRTC to RCMP or to your unit? At the same time, telecom industry and financial industry, are you able to get data from them or get flags from them when suspicious activity is going on?
Sure. Yeah, and actually, I might just address one year right before the question is I wouldn't want to leave the committee with the impression that police aren't heavily focused on investigating fraudsters and cyber criminals. The mandate of the CAFC and the NC3 is very much about enabling law enforcement agencies in Canada to do those investigations, and the federal policing part of the RCMP as well. So there are many investigations underway. I just wanted to point out that we just don't do that as well. We have other activities. In terms of information sharing with CRTC and other entities, we sort of operate. We operate under what our authorities are in terms of sharing. There is some information we can share with CRTC and vice versa. I think in almost any agency to say, hey, if we can improve information sharing across the board, that would make things better. But there's lots of opportunities where we share now. When it comes to private sector entities like telecommunications companies and financial institutions, we've got to be governed how police operate. If we need information from them, we often have to get a production order or other type of measures. There are many opportunities or times when banks will come to us as a victim and say we think we've been victimized, or some of our clients have been victimized. So there is regular communication, and we talked about some of the outreach we do when we come across stuff that we think is impacting their clients. But generally, yes, there's always scope for improved information sharing.
Anything you need from legislators?
Thank you.
Like us?
I'm sorry, Mr. Dong. We have to move to our next round of questions. Your time is up, and we will now move to MP Massé because Mr. Lemire had to step out for a few minutes. Mr. Massé, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I know Mr. Lemire will be back soon. I always enjoy his interventions as well, too. And thanks to the witnesses that are here. So, one of the, I'm glad you finished with the last question. One of the, people, why is this here at Industry Committee? And this is the frustrating part for myself, being here for the number of years, is that, this is a regulated industry that we allow criminal activity to basically course its way through. I mean, that's the telco sector. None of this takes place of our citizens without the actual fact that we actually have our spectrum auctions, we allow access to our infrastructure, we regulate through the CRTC. All those different aspects provide the vehicle for this activity to take place. And I really appreciate the efforts that have taken place, not only here at committee, but also over the last number of years to make a difference. What I'm worried about, and what I'm interested to hear is to further on the conversation, is almost similar to white-collar crime seems to escape the grasp of Parliament Hill here in many respects. And we go after the workers, we go after the street criminals, we go after those. I'm wondering whether or not there's sufficient laws in place. And I'll give a quick example. We saw Rogers recently, drop the 911 from the citizens here. And we saw from the telco industry, from testimony here, that the telcos were not even working together properly to help each other out to protect 911. So I'm wondering whether we should be taking the gloves off with our telcos to some respect to give more power to be able to, or more improvements to be able to have the RCMP and other law enforcement get cooperation. I'd like your comments on that, please.
Sure. Obviously, more of a regulatory type argument or position where CRTC and the government of Canada has the more of the mandate in terms of how regulated or are additional regulations needed. I can say from the RCMP and from law enforcement perspectives, we have good relationships with telco. We try and work to them as much as possible within our current authorities. So I really can't comment on whether, should the government regulate further this sector. We focus on enforcing the criminal code provisions.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. And I take pride in having good relations with the telcos too, despite my criticism of what's going thing. But I wonder at times, given the results that we've received, not only in terms of consumer attacks with regards to the Competition Bureau uncovered the fact that some of the telcos were using improper marketing and aggressive tactics through their own telecommunications efforts. That's a well-known documented case. I'm just wondering whether or not that this priority surfaces the way it should be. How many? I know you're not keeping statistics on this, but are there arrests taking place with the and property seizure of some of the materials and the types of infrastructure? You mentioned in your presentation that some of that was happening. Give us a kind of snapshot. Are you able to get the proper ability to do those things, or is it just basically going after the individuals on the end of the phone? I'm looking for the infrastructure that they're using, and I know it's difficult because you got domestic and international, but.
I would say it's a combination of both, or it's multifaceted. In some cases, the RCMP has participated in large multinational operations where when I say infrastructure, computer hardware, computer servers, things that police or that cyber criminals need or fraudsters. We have participated in helping to take those down globally, and then there's also been pieces here in Canada. So. It's sort of project by project. That's how it it depends on sort of the level that is taken, and then there's action also at the municipal and provincial level as well. There's quite a few success stories in that area where they've taken action at their levels.
If I'm only having a real brief time, if you had two things that you could get to help deal with this issue, what would they be? Is it proceeds from crime, so you could actually reinvest the money that you're saving Canadians and getting back, or is it for resources, or is it law changes or whatever? But if there's a couple things that we could do to help you and to help your officers, what would it be?
I mean, I guess the one low hanging fruit I would ask, particularly in October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, that like all Canadians really try and be more aware of what's happening out there, and that everybody who has an ability to get the message out, including potentially folks in this room, be a proponent of prevention efforts. That's a core part of policing. If we can prevent a lot of this stuff up front, people, the level of victimization will be reduced. So I'd say that's where everybody can have a role to really reduce the level of victimization out there.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Massé.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massé. Now, Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your flexibility. I'm sorry if some of this might seem a little bit redundant. Sometimes at Parliament, we have to be in more places at once. So I'd like to talk about the vulnerability of seniors. Could you share with us if there are any new trends or new types of fraud that could affect seniors? And are these awareness campaigns sufficient? Are we really reaching seniors? And how vulnerable are they?
Je demanderai le sergent Larac de parler de
So, yes, I would like to speak of the vulnerability of seniors in Canada, but there is also a program that is aimed at seniors in Canada. So, yes, frauders do like to target seniors. They're an easy target. If we look at statistics recently, we can see that seniors have been highly targeted, and we consider seniors to be over the age of 60. They make up about 30% of losses that are reported to us, so this is significant. In the Anti-Fraud Centre, we have a program established where we do support seniors. This could be in the case where our analysts have received complaints. We then direct vulnerable people to different support systems. We have support systems that target seniors. It's a very unique program in the sense that we have volunteers that actually come work with us on this. Oftentimes, these are seniors themselves who are retired that come from the IT sector, in the banking sector, or we have some teachers even who are retired that come help us. And then they go work with other seniors. They also help us do presentations for other seniors. This program is mainly in Ontario. We do have the goal of bringing this to other provinces in the east and west. But in Ontario, we do have the largest number of victims. It's the most populous province, and so we have centered our efforts in this province. Of course, there are other efforts that have already been established to try and mitigate the effects of fraud, be it through awareness campaigns online on social networks or through the media, different types of media. So, for example, we had about 400 media requests coming to the CAFC. So we're trying to spread this message and reach as many vulnerable people as we can. Something that's really important, but often is the most difficult, is to encourage victims to recognize fraud and also then go and report it. So we want to be able to better understand schemes that affect Canadians so that we can tailor the message that we are sending out. Yes, I think it's important to note that we need victims to be reporting these schemes, and the media has a big influence. I often think about French. If I get a call in English, I can guess that it's probably fraud and I hang up. But in the French community, are there a lot of French calls? I have the impression it happens a lot more in English than in French. But what is happening in the French community? Most fraud calls are in English because it's very international. and they're trying to target as many people as they can. So that being said, there is some fraud in French. Over the phone, I can't necessarily tell you the scale of the number of reports we've had in French for calls in French. But yes, there are some fraud schemes, some scams that do happen in French. Frauders are going to adapt to their clientele, if we can call it that, just to maximize their profit. Oftentimes, we've heard that it's family members or someone that we know that could be frauding us. Can this happen over the phone? Someone pretending to be a certain company? Could members of someone's family or someone they know do this? I don't necessarily have information on this specifically. But recently, we see a lot of grandparent scams, as we call them. So someone will pretend to be one's family member. They'll pretend that they were in an accident and that they need money immediately. What we can see is that there's usually a sense of urgency in these scams. In this grandparent scams, oftentimes we see that it's seniors that are targeted. So again, we pretend that this member of the senior's family is in trouble and that they need help right away. They might pretend that they're in another province or a community, and they're trying to really amplify this feeling of urgency so that the victim feels the pressure and acts and sends money. We were able to study the topic 2 years ago with my colleague Brian. Do you feel that things are taken more seriously now, 2 years later, after this first study? Do you have a lot more information now? In terms of resources, there has been more investment. In terms of cybercrime, my colleague can speak more to this. We've worked with the Center for Cybercrime. Do you want to add to this, Chris?
Significant investments in the last few years to stand up the National Cybercrime Coordination Unit to work alongside the CAFC. Really, it's important because, as I mentioned, we have this, excuse me, this cyber-enabled aspect where it could actually be a combination of phone and online. And a recent scam or attack that's often happening is you will click on something or you get attracted and you give your phone number and other details, and then you get a call back where they further are able to entrap you in terms of either whether it's an investment scam or even in real time convince you to give access to your system at a company, and then they've got a foot in the door. So there have been quite a few investments to stand up the NC3 in the RCMP to stand up additional cybercrime investigative teams to address this, in a more holistic approach.
Thank you very much. Merci, Monsieur le Maire. C'est tout le temps que vous.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all your time. Now the floor is yours, Ms. Gray.
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here, and thank you for your service as well. I wanted to start my questions today around something that we haven't talked about yet, which is SIM swapping and phone porting scams, which were brought forth as a concern during this committee's last study on this back in 2020. And it was reported in September of 2021 that the CRTC logged nearly 25,000 cases of port SIM swap fraud between August of 2019 and May of 2020. And I was wondering if you had any statistics from your end, from the RCMP end, like how many criminal reports were filed on this, how many arrests, investigations, et cetera, between 2019 and now?
Thank you. I don't have any specific number on SIM swapping. One thing that I've noticed on my center is that the reporting is low on those instances, but they could also be directly related to identity fraud. So if I link that to identity fraud, then obviously I had a significant increase over the past 2-3 years in terms of identity fraud reported. But we're under the impression that SIM swapping on our end has decreased with some of the measures that have been put in place by the industry to prevent that. Like right now, it's much harder to just take the SIM card from your phone and swap it to a different phone without any additional layers of verifications to be completed. Chris.
I was just going to add one, and it applies to kind of sim swapping type scams and others. And folks probably have seen this in a lot of their applications, is the broader application of multi-factor authentication. So when you go to log into a bank or something, it's not just your password that gets you in there. You have to do something else, whether it's a text message with a code or what have you. And the application of that is very impactful, and it is a great measure to reduce fraudster or cyber criminals' ability to either get in your system or to scam you. So I think as we're seeing that being rolled out further across all types of industry, that is having a positive effect on reducing things.
Great, thank you. And so did I hear you say that some of those numbers might be just sort of lumped all together into fraud reporting in general, and maybe it's not being separated out as much as it used to be? Is that
because we don't track a specific category on SIM swapping.
Okay.
Typically, when we would get a report of that, it would be subcategorized under identity fraud or identity theft, because we track both. But I mean, over the past 2 years, like I mentioned, we've seen a sharp increase along that way. But the main reason that we saw that increase too was the fact that there's been many Canadians that their identity has been used to fraudulently obtain financial assistance. So with that, we saw the rise into reportings of identity fraud. Like I mentioned, with the SIM swapping itself, it's not something that precisely have the exact figures. So it's difficult for me to give you an exact number when I don't have that type of data.
Great, thank you. Now, do you have numbers that, and you may not have them here today, but maybe something that you could table that might be with respect to reports that you get and investigations, arrests? That would be because, of course, the CRTC has their reports that they do, but then, of course, you've got your own investigations. So, is that something that you would be able to table for this committee to include with this report?
Are you specific to SIM swapping investigations, or?
Yeah, it could be, but it sounds like they're maybe not being separated as much. So just the overall, fraud, to be helpful with this study from your side, if you have any numbers that would be.
We'll go back and look. I'll just add that, as folks know, the RCMP is not the police of jurisdiction in all parts of Canada. So, it might not give the full picture of what's happening at the municipal or provincial level where the RCMP isn't the police of jurisdiction.
Great,
we'll see what we can find.
Great, thank you very much. Now, you'd actually also mentioned that it's really important for Canadians to be aware, and not even specifically around the SIM swapping and the phone porting scams, but also other types of fraud. So, is the RCMP actively doing some type of a education campaign, especially during this month? Do you have a campaign that's active right now?
Sure. Yeah. So Cybersecurity Awareness Month, it's actually a government-wide effort on this, and in many respects, the cyber pieces of this are led by the Canadian Centre of Cybersecurity. Another initiative that was part of the new National Cybersecurity Strategy that was released in 2018, and part of that, as I mentioned, is this month is about don't get phished. It's all about phishing, and so we both have activities that we support. We help the Cyber Center out with that under their Get Cyber Safe program. And then, as I mentioned in my remarks, we have Fraud Prevention Month in March, which is a big event. Last year, I think we had, if I can just get my stats here, we had over 300,000 visits to the CAFC website during that month, and we think through social media we reached about 700,000 people. So it does give you a sense that if you craft
Can I just ask one more question, because I know we're out of time here. Sorry to interrupt you, but are any of those communications in other languages? We know that cultural communities and New Canadians in particular can be subject to fraud. So is that outreach in other cultural communities and other languages?
Yeah, it is a good point. Those majority are in the two official languages of Canada, but we recognize there is a need to figure out how do we do more outreach to new Canadians or folks that don't speak English or French. There is different at different levels, or in some cases in the nonprofit or NGO sector. There's quite a bit of work in this space, but there's definitely more to be done.
In some regions.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Je passerai maintenant la parole.
Thank you. And now, Madame Lapointe.
Questions that my colleague MP Gray and MP Lemire were asking around raising awareness. So you talked about, and specifically I'm interested in how we help vulnerable populations such as seniors. So you talked about what happens when complaints are put forward, but how can we get upstream from that in preventing those vulnerable populations? And you described some campaigns with 300,000 hits to a website and social media. But a lot of our seniors don't have smartphones. They're not necessarily on computers. What are some of the things that we do to help those vulnerable populations?
Sure, I'll start, and then I'll turn to Sergeant Larocque to speak a little bit more about the senior support program. But agreed, part of where I think we are now in terms of a program, in terms of prevention awareness, is really trying to tailor the approach to different audiences to figure out what resonates with them and what do they need to stay safe online or not become a victim of a telephone scam. So you're right. More seniors may feel more comfortable getting pamphlets or booklets. We've done some work in the past in producing booklets, using other formats of where there might be in-person meetings or in-person gatherings to promote that. COVID threw a wrench into a lot of that work for a couple of years, but we're now back into that space. And I'll just let Sergeant Larocque talk a little bit more about the senior support program and some of that outreach activities there.
Sure. And in terms of outreach, I mean, we do have those proactive also presentations that are done in person to the extent that they can be done. Of course, through COVID, like Mr. Lynham explained, it kind of slowed down our efforts, but we still found ways to be able to reach out. We had virtual presentations when we could not be in person that we would do. Our senior volunteers have now started to do the engagement in person. Just last week or the week before, one of my communication officer did a presentation to newcomers, so which was actually great to be able to socialize them with all the fraudulent threats that can be out there to help them navigate through that. And of course, I mean, I'll recognize that prevention will continue to be key. We'll never do enough prevention. There's always more that we can do. And of course, it's always going to remain a challenge to be able to reach as many people as possible. And one thing that we even reproduced at the center was to use the hashtag #Tell2. So basically, if I tell you about a fraud story or a fraud threat to two people, and then you tell it to two more others, then it will amplify the messaging, right? And we also encourage, because you mentioned about senior volunteers, not senior volunteers, but senior victims of fraud where they can be more vulnerable and more difficult to reach. And that's where we prey on their family to be able to do that, to help us also reach out and have those conversations with them.
This morning, and the CRTC told us the same thing last week, that only approximately 10 to 15% of victims of fraudulent calls file a report. So the question in my mind is, how can legislators help increase those reporting numbers? And the current process of having to contact CRTC, complete a form, it's very onerous for victims. So what if there was like a national automated system, which all carriers are obligated to implement, where simply using a code such as *555, and then the fraudulent call could be immediately ended and blocked. It would be immediately reported, and that would help us track and trace these. Has that type of a system solution been considered?
I'm not aware of a solution like that. I think, though, we do need more ideas about how we make it easier for people to report when they're a victim. And it is actually part of the mandate of the NC3 and work with the CAFC to do that. So, for example, we are building and rolling out a new online system called the National Cybercrime and Fraud Reporting System. We went right back to sort of first principles and went and talked to senior citizens and say, hey, if you were to report online, what language resonates with you? how do we make it easier? And so we've redesigned an approach that allows that to do that. We're rolling that out. It's currently in our beta approach, where we get about 25 victims a day, and then we iterate that constantly to make that more user friendly. So that's just one example of we have to both make it easier and explore different ways to help Canadians report, and then that information feeds into the ecosystem that can then help either investigations or further prevention efforts.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn it over to Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes 30.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the last report, there were 3 recommendations that may apply to you. First, in working with Statistics Canada, CAFC, and the governments that enforce the law throughout the government, we need to be focusing on data on fraudulent calls. The CRTC, service providers, and the police need to have more information on fraudulent calls. The Government of Canada has submitted a bill to be working with the GRC, the CRTC, and other government agencies in order to ensure that there is proper coordination to prevent fraudulent calls and to protect Canadians' privacy. So my question is, has the government come to speak to you to try to improve what they are doing? Have these recommendations been applied?
Recommendations there. In terms of the first one, a lot of work has been done in terms of getting more data and information out there about fraud. We're actually very shortly going to be releasing a report on the annual activities of the CAFC, which will have a lot of additional data about fraud and what have you. That should be coming out in the next little while. We continually look at information sharing arrangements with other agencies and what have you. And we talked about earlier about working with the CRTC on that. I'd say there has been some progress in terms of how we work with them, but more to be done. And generally, I'll turn over to Sergeant Larocque to talk about our open data kind of approach at the CAFC.
Yeah, and right now too, there's been recent developments on that front where we want to release more data, make it more accessible to the public. So we're currently working with one of our unit at the RCMP to be able to publish that type of data using the open government data concept. So, for example, like reports that we publish, some of them are for preventions, like the Bolton fraud reports and stuff like that, will be type of reports that will be looked to be uploaded to that portal, but as well as for fraud-related data that's coming. So even like for the academic sector, for example, if there's research that wants to be done, then it's going to make it a lot more accessible for the data because they'll be able to have some trend data that's going to become, hopefully in the near future, available. Of course, data will be anonymized to protect the victim and suspect information, but the data will still be sufficient to be able to draw some trends. And like Mr. Lynham mentioned, the annual report will provide also some good contextual data as well.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Larocque. Mr. Lemaire, 3.5 minutes. Mr. Marcy.
Real quick, so prevention is everything in many respects. In fact, we'll have Mr. Mesher coming up. He's a former RCMP fraud investigator who's been working on the Western Union file, did an amazing job, and he'll be testifying here. And with that, we actually did an email out to members of Parliament to try to get that out there. It was taken up by about maybe 10 other members of Parliament that we sent out twice. So it's always hard to get it raised as a priority. I would like to hear from you. Like in 2018, Public Safety Minister then Ralph Goodall convened a summit on guns, drugs, and smuggling and so forth here in Ottawa as a summit. I'm just wondering, and I'd like your honest opinion, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Are we at the point where we need something like that, a summit on fraud, to bring in the provincial, municipal, federal, and then the other legislators, like to have something more robust for public relations. I don't want to have meetings for sake of meetings by any means. I have enough of those. But what I did like about the summit that Mr. Goodell put on is it then bound a lot of people that hadn't worked together in the past. So there was formal stuff and informal stuff that took place later. But given your time and the commitment, is this a summit on fraud and cybersecurity something that would be worthwhile for the country at this point? And again, you're not insulting me if you say just no.
I think bringing people together to, the stakeholders are involved in different form, whether it's a summit or some other type of activity, to talk about the impact and figure out solutions. I think there'd be great support for that. I know, for example, there is a lot of activity already out where the government recently put out call for consultations to, the renewal of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and that was an avenue to both solicit online input and then also meet with different stakeholders in this. So really, we talk about addressing cybercrime and fraud being a team sport. It involves law enforcement, it involves other government agencies, and then private and non-public sector. And so I go frequently to conferences or events where that is the theme, and people are in those rooms committed to figuring out solutions to how to reduce victimization. So I think the more type of events or activities where we can bring those stakeholders together to say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, and here's some solutions I think I could put on the table, I think would be beneficial.
And
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Monsieur Lemire is back, so. Just to follow up, Mr. LaRoche, you mentioned about getting multilingual material out to people. Is that where, is it a matter of resources? So say, for example, to get it in Arabic and other types of languages, is it just a matter of resources? Because it is expensive to get proper translation. I know this from my writing and so forth. Is that kind of just, that's the case?
It is, and to clarify that too, I mean, to some extent, it's being done into regions as well, right? It's not only us that are producing the fraud awareness piece. So to some extent, for example, like my colleagues in BC, I recall that we've worked with them and they've put up posters and pamphlets into multiple language to alert people, for example, on the danger of using a cryptocurrency, not virtual, but bank machine, right? So in regions, there's still some activities where information is being translated into multi-language, so it's very on regional aspect, but of course, there's always areas where we could improve as well on that front.
If I could just quickly add,
very briefly.
Yes, please. I mean, part of it, I would say, is the translation, but we also have to take a holistic that it, culturally, it might not be the translation, the approach you take in trying to get the information out there, engaging, whether it's new Canadians, or Indigenous communities and people like that. That approach of how you get that prevention message out has to, what resonates with them, what do they want to hear and receive that information.
Merci, je passerai la parole.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Genereux, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses, Mr. Linem. You said that you have challenges that are ever present and that persist. So I know that this is a challenge that will continue for a long time. So with all the new technology, we know that the challenge is not going anywhere. This being said, do you have certain goals? When I'm looking at the numbers that you gave us, $379,000 lost because of fraud. You gave us other numbers as well. We're talking about less than 1% that is being recovered. Do you think that you're doing enough? To answer your question, recovering money from fraud is going to be very different because we always need to be adapting what we're doing. Once we have a means of protection, well, criminals are going to work even harder to go around these. And so, again, they're going to keep finding new ways to do this. So, of course, prevention is still key here. The money that we're giving back to victims is always less than the amount of money that they've actually lost. Once money is sent to frauders, frauders will move the money along very quickly. In many cases, and potentially in the majority of cases, it's once there's money that is sent, the money is gone within 24 hours. And so we have to act quickly. And so we want people to understand that once they have a fraudulent request, they shouldn't be waiting to report it. Timing is important if they want to get their money back. Because once the money has been sent out, they usually don't have very much time to recover that money. You said that you're using volunteers, people who have worked in the telecommunications industry to try to improve the type of research that you're doing. Now, speaking in terms of technology, do you also use hackers? Do you hire hackers to support you? People who have a knowledge of the dark web, who essentially are the equivalent of those who are real-life fraudsters, but that you're hiring to support you? It's an interesting question, I know, but yeah, no, it's actually a great question. I think my colleague can probably answer this better, though.
Or cyber criminals, but interesting. There are good lessons to be learned in terms of their activities and how they conducted their criminal activities or what have you. And by learning that, you can then make your systems harder or figure out how someone got into a system and then adopt those prevention approaches. There's actually an industry out there where penetration testing, where companies will try and offer a service where we'll try and to get into a network or what have you. And in those cases, those penetration testers usually have to fall under a pretty tight regime. So we have to be a little careful, but when we can learn lessons from how hackers operated, we learn them and try to incorporate them into how we protect and follow up.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Genereux. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Erskine Smith for a couple minutes.
Thanks very much. My first question is in relation to some of the numbers on the CAC's website. So the dollar amount seemed to track in 2022 to where we were in 2021 in terms of, well over $300 million lost so far, on track to maybe even exceed last year. But the number of victims of fraud seems to be tracking much lower, and I wonder how you could explain that.
The answer to that is the fact that on average, losses per victim have increased. There's trends with fraudulent investments, mostly related to crypto type of sector, like Bitcoins or any use of cryptocurrencies, where scammers.
But is there an explanation, not for the disparity, but is there an explanation for why we see a lower number of victims?
Yeah, because the losses are higher on average per victim. So we have less victims reporting much greater losses. So that can explain why.
No. I'm not asking about the disparity. I'm asking about, are we seeing greater success? Is there something you point to say we've been more successful, therefore we see a lower number of victims?
No, I don't have a specific correlation to that, sorry.
Okay. And the shaken and third measures, have they been successful?
Sorry?
Measures that have been put in place, specifically as fraud calls that you've seen to before, they've been successful.
Juste point d'ordre, il y a un défi sur.
Point of order, we're having sound issues, and so the interpreters are not able to interpret.
So an issue with microphone essentially. So I'll slur and then I'll give the floor to Andy. But the shaken and third measures that part of our 2020 report when they're to come forth thereafter, and I'm
Désolé,
wondering how
Nate.
successful they've been.
Désolé de t'arrêter, Nate. Là,
Yeah.
on a fait.
Sorry, Nate, we're unable to interpret because the internet connection is not good enough. It's very choppy.
Nate, you were asking about
thanks.
shaken and stir and whether that's been successful, I think. Is that correct, Nate?
That's right.
Okay, as far as I'm concerned, the shake and stir is not fully implemented, so it's hard for me to tell if it's effectively working. One thing that we noticed, though, with fraud that are initiated by telephone, that scammers are highly using spoofing technologies to make you believe that the number that's calling you is actually local when it's not. So for that, what it tells us at the Anti-Fraud Center is that, again, it's another example where scammers are very adaptive, finding ways to be able to still connect with their victims.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all the witnesses for appearing today. We have just completed the first hour of this meeting, and we will need a few minutes to suspend the meeting while we switch out the witnesses. So thank you so much, everybody.
committee. And with us for this hour, we have Randall Barron-Chung, Kevin Cosgrove, and John Meacher. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. And without further ado, I'll cede the floor to Mr. Barron-Chung for 5 minutes for his testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Randall Barron-Chung, co-founder of Canadian SIM Swap Victims United. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to reappear because last time I was here, actually, the lockdown was announced that afternoon, so I hope not to be the harbinger of another pandemic. So thank you. Yeah. To refresh your memory on number portability, which was introduced in 2007, it was designed to enable customers to switch carriers easily while retaining their phone numbers. But it's something that's been exploited by fraudsters to transfer ownership of a phone number to themselves, often by manipulating the customer service representative of a telco. Once in possession of your phone number, they take advantage of SMS and text-based authentication methods and click "Forgot my password" on to take access and control of the victim's accounts. So if you think about it, that can be everything from your email to banking to cloud storage to crypto wallets. Within our organization of over 20 victim advocates, we have people who have lost possession of all their data, had hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen, and in my case, had my livelihood threatened with extortion. So what's happened since that last fortuitous meeting? As part of its November 2020 report, this committee, with a few different faces now, had two key recommendations, which I'm paraphrasing. One, that a hearing be held, and in the absence of that, legislation. The minister responded by saying that we entrust the CRTC and the Wireless Network Portability Council, which is comprised of the telcos themselves, to handle it and do its job in self-enforcement, and that legislation is unnecessary, as unauthorized porting is covered as a crime. I can speak for almost all victims in our group that our issue is not with criminal enforcement of this issue or with the perpetrators themselves. It's a real matter of distrust with the telcos and its regulator. To do something probably never done in this chamber before, I'm going to quote rapper Ice-T. Our attitude is more that don't hate the player, hate the game. And what I mean by that is that we know criminals will always look for vulnerabilities to exploit, but it's the system, the telcos that we entrust with to protect our personal information, that do the math of what costs to prevent these frauds versus the near zero cost of punishment they bear in the event of failure, and the regulator who exists to protect the public that have failed us. And in fact, both of whom have been thus far dismissive, unsympathetic, and ignorant of victims. Since our last meeting, the following has been revealed. It's more prevalent than most people thought. I know Ms. Gray alluded to this, where an access to information request filed by the Globe's telecom reporter, who actually ended up being a victim of SIM swap fraud, ironically, revealed over 24,627 cases, to be exact, of unauthorized ports over that 10-month period in August 2019 to May 2020. That represented 1% of all ports. Now, if you compare that to credit card frauds, where only 0.17% of transactions are fraudulent. At a peak, 2.5% of all ports were fraudulent. Its magnitude can be massive. 2 Canadians, one in Montreal and one in Hamilton, have been charged with stealing between $40 to $50 million in cryptocurrency and other credit card frauds in Canada and the United States. And meanwhile, other victims in our groups are attempting to recoup millions in stolen funds due to telco customer service representatives surrendering personal information to fraudsters, enabling execution of the unauthorized port. Finally, telcos have self-enforced in the meantime, unsuccessfully in the beginning. After a number of failed attempts to address the problem, they introduced text notifications around the summer of 2020. This continues to fail because we know victims have emerged afterwards. There's a group of 14 that we're aware of that's attempting to recoup several $1 million back in 2021. And telcos have failed to prevent the exploitation of their representatives and apply the practices inconsistently. So the fact remains this. Our digital identities and our phone numbers are only growing in criticality. Your SIM is the new SIN number. That is until SMS-based two-factor authentication is replaced wholesale. Second is that the safety of our digital identity is as strong as the weakest link. And in this case, telco customer service representatives are the weakest link in the line of defense of our phone numbers. Investigations have revealed phone conversations and chat logs of CSRs being socially engineered into providing information to fraudsters. This speaks to a lack of training, misaligned incentives to prioritize customer throughput over customer protection, and a lack of punitive measures for the telcos themselves in the event of failure. Finally, it remains that progress in practices around unauthorized porting remains opaque. The fact that we weren't able to produce numbers and can only be produced through access to information requests speaks to that. There is no proactive disclosure of data on incidences or effectiveness of practices. We need to have a hearing to get a more fulsome understanding of the situation response and allow for victims to be heard. Second, we need to codify rules that create consistency and durability in practices and transparency in metrics. And third, we need to introduce enforcement for non-compliance, as I had suggested back in 2020 when Australia had introduced fines of up to 250,000 Australian dollars for non-compliance. These are actions, these three recommendations are all supported by over 12,500 Canadians who signed an open media petition that spoke to this effect. So let's not wait another pandemic for things to happen on this. I welcome your questions and a way to a cure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baranchung. I don't know if you've heard me. I'll now turn it over to Mr. Cosgrove for 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the committee members for offering the opportunity to even speak today. My name is Kevin Cosgrove. I'm a network technician, educator, and a digital safety advocate in Windsor and Essex County in Ontario. For almost 3 decades, I've been working in the IT field, but I've shifted more to working with the actual people. And through contacts and people throughout our community, I've been working with law enforcement and working on digital fraud and actually educating the public in that. I teach classes each semester with seniors specifically. As we know, seniors are a major target for online and digital fraud and phone fraud. From the stats that I receive, way down at my end of things, there are almost 25% of fraud that is targeted directly at seniors. So each year we spend time with local police and educate the seniors at how to avoid the actual fraud. I know this committee is certainly focused on the things at a higher level, right through the telcos and dealing with things at other international levels. But I'm the guy that's down in the trenches, actually having the little old lady come to me to tell me she got scammed and actually need that type of help and who should she call. And what my biggest frustration is working at a local level and being an educator, specifically focusing on these matters, is that the information that is already available and out there, especially with the RCMP, there is a phenomenal amount of information that they have. When I speak to people in my classes, no one's heard of it. So it's not that the RCMP is not doing a good job or not doing an outreach, but when I speak to people, they're unaware. The RCMP, if the committee is aware, has a fabulous publication known as the Little Black Book of Scams. It's a wonderful publication that they've had for quite a few years. I only know one person in all the almost 20 years of doing this stuff that has seen a physical copy of it. So it's definitely an issue where the programs and things that we have going on and some of the education and outreach that we're getting from the RCMP isn't necessarily getting down to every level. And of course, then there's the disconnect sometimes where the RCMP is not the leading authority in a jurisdiction and relying more on local police to deal with that. And they're doing their own jobs. And basically, each little area that we're running into are trying to reinvent the wheel instead of having a unified response to some of this stuff. One of the big focuses I have with teaching seniors and putting stuff out in the community is that it's made accessible. What I noticed when I just got into doing this almost 20 years ago is there's a lot of focus on details and definitions and things that are overwieldy for just the average person to pick up a pamphlet and understand it. I'm not disparaging on some of the information that's out there, but an 84-year-old woman does not care what the difference is between fishing, smishing, spear fishing, whale fish. They don't care about those types of details. They need the information that they can keep themselves safe without reading a PSA pamphlet that is in the wrong direction just to educate the public. So I'm definitely ready for any questions that you may have. I think I felt I even had a few questions for the RCMP when I was sitting back there, but that's not my place. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And there was actually some mention earlier about the shake and stir and what kind of progress has been made from there. Even though I'm a civilian, I actually do speak with criminal intelligence analysts at the CAFC and as well as our financial crimes unit here in Windsor. And according to them, those types of calls that are specifically targeted by the stir shaken have reduced. People are no longer reporting specifically receiving calls where it's Canada Revenue on their phone. They may receive that exact same phone call, just showing up as a long-distance number. But as far as it being spoofed and displayed as law enforcement or Canada Revenue, that has definitely been decreased as far as all the information I've been given.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Cosgrove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cosgrove. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. Now, 5 more minutes to our next witness.
I assume that's me?
Oui, la parole est à vous, Monsieur Meacher.
Yes, Mr. Meacher, the floor is yours.
Greetings. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is John Meacher, that rhymes with teacher, and I was with the RCMP for over 32 years. During that time, I spent approximately 10 years investigating fraud, mostly in the Greater Toronto area. I've investigated various frauds, including the infamous CRA scam. And after I retired in 2019, I continued my work in a volunteer capacity to create fraud awareness. Although I'm open to discussing many aspects of fraud, including organizational and governmental missed opportunities, I've chosen to focus on a foundational component of fraud prevention. Specifically, I'll speak to the difference between quote unquote fraud awareness and what I call meaningful fraud awareness. First, it's always good to reiterate the losses, which continue to escalate year after year and are currently at an all-time high. As per the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, last year those losses rang in at over 383 million. But worse yet, that amount, as per the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, only represents 5% of the actual losses. So what we're looking at in Canada is fraud has become a multi-billion-dollar enterprise for fraudsters all around the world. Those same fraudsters tend to prey on what I describe as traditional fraud victims, such as seniors, newcomers, refugees, and the intellectually challenged. Although I can offer several egregious examples of fraudsters targeting members of those communities, I must remind everyone that just about anyone, given the right set of circumstances, can fall for a scam. It's also necessary to remember that the victim impact often goes beyond just simply a financial hit. In some cases, the victim's life savings are wiped out, and that's often never recovered. And sadly, victims also face layers of emotional impacts, ranging from embarrassment to depression, and in extreme cases, unfortunately, many victims end up taking their own lives. Specific to phone fraud, even though these scams have been around for decades, we've yet to implement measures that have been able to reduce their ease of access to our phone systems. Statistics from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre reinforce that point, as the phone has been and continues to be the preferred method of solicitation for fraud. Furthermore, with a view to the CRA scam that arrived in Canada in 2014, along with subsequent variants, I remain unconvinced that there is any sense of urgency in creating a barrier to the exploitation of our phone systems. To that end, we also need to be aware that we can't rely on enforcement, albeit necessary, or the courts as a meaningful deterrent for fraudsters. Unfortunately, we're not left with many options to protect our fraud vulnerable communities. All that said, fraud awareness is the solution, and that needs to be employed. However, it needs to be employed in a meaningful, relentless, and focused manner, something that does not always happen. If the status quo approach to fraud awareness worked, we would not be seeing losses growing on a yearly basis. At the same time, although many people in Canada do great work on this front, we need to do much more, and we need to do it now. Although fraud awareness can involve websites and social media, however, if potential victims are unaware of those platforms, it's pointless to believe that a series of tweets or online posts can create meaningful fraud awareness. From my perspective, the golden rule of meaningful fraud awareness must be driven by our ability to get the message to those who need to hear it the most. Failing to do that, we will continue to see further victimization. And lastly, I'm willing to work with any parliamentarian in a nonpartisan manner, just as I did with Mr. Massey on the Western Union file, which was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for victims of fraud to recoup losses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll now turn to Mr. Deltel for 6 minutes. But Mr. Meacher, would it be possible to lower your microphone a little bit? We're getting a lot of popping sounds. Can you just say a few words for the interpreters to confirm if it's okay?
Am I still popping?
Sounds good to me, Mr. the Clerk.
Actually, if we could just have Mr. Meacher, if you could bring it up to, let's say, mustache height would probably be the, yeah, right around there.
And how does that sound?
That's much better, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So, Monsieur Deltel pour 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome, everyone, to the House of Commons.
Point with Mr. Cosgrove about the RCMP. Your testimony is quite interesting, and if you meet another RCMP guy in the corner of the, you can talk to them. You know, they are very open-minded. Don't be afraid. So, Mr. Cosgrove, you raised an issue about the fact that the RCMP has a lot of tools, but unfortunately, people doesn't know that. Does that mean that people are not informed, or does that mean that the RCMP hides some information?
On my level, just from the education side of things, and of course, I do look into the CAFC and the RCMP and the resources that they have, and the resources there are excellent. I sometimes rewrite things for my own classes or just use their own materials. There's no need to reinvent the wheel with some of this stuff. But in just talking to people, a lot of them don't know it's there. Now, I can't speak at all of the why. There's not enough information given out, or a split in jurisdictions when you're having local law enforcement or RCMP, and it's just not taking a local interest. I'm not sure the exact reason. The material is there. On your side and the committee's side, of course, you have an interest in the actual statistics and the numbers. For the average person, they're not interested in accessing that information. But as far as the fraud prevention and awareness and everything else, after doing this, I teach with a special program with our local university. It's for 55 and older, and I've been doing it every semester for 8 years now, and there's always a class sign-up, as well as I do talks with our regular police, and the interest is definitely there. There's no question about that. I have people coming to me, not just me trying to chase people down and put pamphlets into their hands, but the information that is already available, and it's available, and people can look this stuff up online. They can get pamphlets. They can visit their local police. There's an unlimited number of ways that people can be educated to prevent this stuff, but somehow there's a disconnect, and that's why I've been focusing my own work, and even working with MP Brian Massey, on trying to educate the public specifically. and it's been doing good. I'm hoping after a few years that there's a big hole in the map where reporting and fraud happens. That might be a little optimistic, but getting the information, as far as I'm concerned, does not require shake and stir. It does not require enforcement. It doesn't require U.S. law enforcement cooperation. If every person that I've reached so far knows what a scam is, whether it's through SMS, text, or online, or a phone call, they can identify the fraud in the first place. None of them are effective.
That testimony, Mr. Cosgrove, we don't have any RCMP people in this town, in this committee, but we have a former RCMP, a guy's in the Mr. Mecher. So, Mr. Mecher, I would like to know what are your thoughts about when you hear Mr. Cosgrove talking about the fact that there is plenty of information, but people are not aware of that. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, that actually speaks to largely what I was talking about, and I couldn't agree with him more. Having the information isn't the issue. Getting that information to those who need it the most is. And that speaks to have a proper communications environment. And it goes beyond, and I want to reiterate, there's a lot of people doing good work. Case in point, what Mr. Cosgrove is doing. But from a national perspective, the RCMP, it's my humble position that the RCMP, and by extension, the federal government, doesn't see fraud and fraud awareness as a priority. And to be fair, during my time within fraud, I've never seen any federal government actually pursuing fraud or fraud awareness as a priority. So this is not something unique to just now. The only thing that's more pressing now is we're seeing losses completely off the charts to what we were seeing 10 years ago.
And I will keep in mind that you're talking about only 5% of the loss that are identified, instead of there is a lot of billions of dollars, I swear, that we are losing. If I have enough time, Chair, I would like to ask a question to Mr. Baran Chong. Mr. Chong, deeply appreciate your comment. I want to get back to the third recommendation that you have made. Maybe I was not aware very much, but you talk about having, en fait, those who are not complaining shall be, you have an obligation to complain if your testimony about your third recommendation. Can you explain your third?
Yeah, I believe my third recommendation was around what the Australian Communications Commission had done. What they had done is so they introduced a process which was very similar to what we proposed back in 2020, which essentially had to have an authorization by the customer to execute the port. And if the company did not comply with that, for every instance where they didn't do that, there would be up to a $250,000 fine. And actually, one of the Australian carriers has paid over $200,000 for 15 instances of non-compliance. So they didn't go for the full max for each instance, but certainly it happens, and we've seen reductions because of that. So there is that deterrent element.
Do you have enough time, Mr. Lightbaum?
20 secondes, Monsieur.
20 seconds, Mr. Deltel.
Merci à vous. Je passerai la parole à Monsieur.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Gaillard, 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for making time for the committee. Mr. Baron Chong, you were slightly critical of telcos, and I say that with sarcasm, obviously. You say in your own words that they've been unsympathetic, unhelpful, that they've quite literally failed. What are the missed opportunities? What could they be doing better to prevent fraud?
Yeah, and it's not. I guess it's because it's deeply personal as a victim myself. Since then, I've been able to actually hear the recording from the police of the customer service representative who impersonated a Rogers employee and called Rogers a store and essentially got my information, surrendered it very easily, and had, essentially impersonated this employee, was able to provide customer number and all the other stuff. So I think it speaks to a broader problem that's within the telcos and the ability to kind of socially engineer, exploit these folks. I think part of the problem is, if you think of an incentive, I can tell you an outcome, right? The problem is that these customer service reps, and I have sympathy for them, they're not very highly paid, they're not very highly trained. A lot of their kind of metrics are based upon how many customers can you get through, during your shift? What's the satisfaction of that? So their incentives are more to kind of, if someone wants to try to port their number, is to let them do it, right? They don't want to put up resistances. They don't want to, challenge, is this the right person or things like that. So if the incentives continue to essentially enable them to focus more on throughput, business outcomes and things like that versus protecting customers' privacy and information, then I think this will persist. The second thing, in terms of when we're talking about awareness, there is, of course, the kind of broader awareness of good hygiene. Let's move away from SMS-based 2FA. This is something that the Federal Communications Commission in the United States has been promoting, considering it a national security threat, using SMS-based 2FA and SIM swapping. But there's also the corporate awareness. So, for example, when Rogers introduced its text notification in its first kind of failed attempt of its form, customers thought the text notifications were frauds. They thought it was spam as well. But it's because their practices being so obscure and not sharing these practices that customers weren't aware that this was actually trying to protect them. So there's many different opportunities, and a lot of it emanates from the telcos themselves.
Great, thank you. So you also are critical of two-factor authentication. Are there alternatives, or what would you recommend moving to?
Yes, I'm more critical of SMS-based two-factor authentication because that vulnerability is that once the number is stolen from you, the SMS goes to the fraudster. But there are other things out there like app-based two-factor authentication. So you may have heard of Google Authenticator, which is very commonly used. The problem is that there was a Princeton study of 140 of the most popular websites. Many of these websites, the first kind of factor of authentication they promote is an SMS-based two-factor authentication. So we kind of need to move away from that, especially for these critical industries. I can tell you that some of these banks within Canada still use SMS-based 2FA, and that's their only form of two-factor authentication. So we need to really look at moving away from this if that vulnerability and that distrust of telcos persists.
In your testimony, you also said that there was no release of data of the incidences. That strikes me because it's shouldn't the CRTC be collecting that?
Oh, I'm sure they collect it, but they just don't want to share it. Mm-hmm. I mean, the only way this person was able to access it, like I mentioned, this is a Globe and Mail telco reporter, ironically. She had to file an access to information request to get that information. PIAC, the Public Interest Advocacy Center, they've been requesting it multiple times. And the CRTC has written letters saying, no, this is not in the public interest, or this would compromise potentially the security of individuals and in the telcos. So it's an absurd argument, in my opinion, of defending the telcos.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gaillard. Now, Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cosgrove, you were present in the room when the RCMP was present. We asked some questions. I did, my colleague as well, all on the topic of seniors. Were you satisfied with the answers that you heard?
I have communicated with them over the years, even just doing my local programs and education, and they have reached out to me as far as further support or being able to take basic information that we've had available and working more hand in hand. No, it's not really something that I've had that experience of. And whether or not it's because we're down in Windsor and we're just off in a corner, or we have our local police to deal with, that I can't speak for. But there are times in doing the things that I do, working with our local police or doing education, working with our university, that I definitely do feel like I'm operating a grassroots program that shouldn't be grassroots after 10 years. So more support, regardless of the direction, would definitely be a benefit. I have looked at their own materials, and I certainly have nothing to disparage about that. It is good and sufficient materials, very, very elaborate, But whether or not that's getting to everybody is the question we're probably looking to answer here today.
Of course, several of our recommendations are for better collaboration, more transparency, more data sharing, especially with the industry as well as government organizations. Do you think that there is enough collaboration? Are you satisfied? I'm sure last week you heard the responses from the CRTC. So what do you think that we can do more at this point?
The information more accessible. Like I said, having higher level programs or information that's not the information that people need. It's very detailed. It's sending potential fraud victims a dictionary and just hoping that they read the whole thing. Instead of boiling it down to just what the fraud actually is all about, how to avoid it, that most fraud, it doesn't really matter if it's through a text or through a phone call or through an email. These are the same type of scams that they're using. You can get an email about cryptocurrency or have a phone call about investing in cryptocurrency. The method doesn't matter, and there is a lot of focus on the information that I've seen anyway that spends too much time focusing on the methods, making some of the information seem like it's over people's heads. I focus on dialing things down and keeping things straightforward. There's a publication that our local businesses and Windsor Police and a few other private donors actually funded to be published. And that was reached out through the community, and the reception from it was phenomenal. And it was not taking the high-level information and seeing how much we can give to the people or how smart I can make myself seem. It's how we can take that information down and present it to people that they're actually going to find that information useful.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bang Chung. I'm sure that you have a lot to say on this topic as well. I'll ask you the same question. What do you think about the industry and the recommendations that look to improve the situation on a concrete level?
Yeah, thank you. You know, when our group saw the recommendations from this report, we were actually quite appreciative because I think it essentially reflected what we had asked for in terms of supporting a hearing. Because one of the things that the response, I believe, from the minister about the hearing was that they didn't feel it was appropriate to have a hearing because they didn't want to solicit views from the public on how to protect themselves, which I thought was, somewhat silly because the recommendation, where the telcos got to now, was a recommendation we made back in 2020. But because they had dragged their heels or had not listened to us, more victims had accumulated in that time. The second is that they don't understand that a hearing is not just to, let's say, solicit recommendations or anything like that. Many of these victims do not feel heard. Okay? You may recall when you asked me back in 2020, how did Rogers respond to my fraud? They offered me $100. Their customer service rep gave away my information, which took away all of my data. They threatened to destroy my life, to destroy my career in exchange for $25,000. That's what they asked from me. And Rogers wanted to give me $100 for that. That was the apology. For other folks that have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, they're taking them to court instead. They're not cooperating. It takes these criminal investigations to reveal the kind of decay that's within the practices of the telcos. So that's why we continue to believe that, you know, a hearing needs to kind of give that transparency in terms of the numbers, what's the practices, what are the ways that, you know, we've seen different patterns of how victims occur. And then second, we want to codify it. The FCC also believes that, you know, there's no consistency and durability in these practices. They can choose to, you know, not do it or just say it was a slip up. And then third, we need that enforcement there, which we believe, you know, from the Australia example was critical in ensuring there was compliance and things like that. So those are the three things that we kind of stick to. And I believe the committee was supportive of last time.
Merci pour...
Thank you for this clarity, and thank you for coming to speak to us. I think that this is extremely helpful for us. Thank you.
Mr. Baron-Chung and Mr. Lemire will move to Mr. Massé for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll continue with Mr. Baron-Chung. And just also to thank you, your efforts have been nothing short of heroic. Looking at what you've gone through and sharing that and being here again as a witness is much appreciated. we had the CRTC here on Friday, and I swear I almost broke down into a Lewis Black style rant with regards to the testimony that we heard. My concern is exactly what you're expressing is, and I'm wondering whether a summit, I'm reclassified as that, or you're talking about a hearing that was original thing. I think it's the same type of thing where we could get, I think, some more public-led accountability and then also some expectations for our cross-jurisdictional agencies, whereas when they sit here individually, it's hard for them to criticize and to make recommendations for others, but perhaps if we had more of a civilian-based approach, just wondering what you think about that. Then I'll go to Mr. Cosgrove and then to our witness on telecommunications. Sorry, now. So please go ahead.
Yeah, we're highly supportive of the idea. You know, it doesn't matter really the form of it. Again, it's all about being able to be heard. We've learned a lot from the different victim stories because our group essentially is very grassroots. You know, I identify them by scanning through articles, reaching out to them, or they come to us and they tell us, you know, the circumstances of these issues. So a public-based approach, which can help, you know, understand whether it's the fraud, how it happens itself, or those points of confusion that enable the fraud. So, for example, the text message where they say, I don't know what, you know, if this is a fraud or not. The second is, if you think about with portability, it takes two to tango. There's two telcos involved in it, right? Because it's typically going from one carrier to the winning carrier, right? And so there needs to be a kind of consistent practice and standard across across the industry itself. And then third, I think, you know, there needs to be like a much more deeper layer at the kind of business process level when we're talking about these vulnerabilities within the organizations. This isn't just in Canada. This is in the United States, in other countries where we've seen SIM swaps occur because insiders or the ability to socially engineer people within the organization essentially enable an open season on people's information. So I agree with you on that suggestion.
Okay, and I'm going to move to Mr. Meacher and Mr. Cosgrove. Maybe start with Mr. Cosgrove. He's right next to me right here. And thank you, and Mr. Meacher, for your efforts. It's been fun working with you in many respects because this has been one of these issues where it does feel like almost like the war on drugs is that, you know, it's so hard to go after some of the top players in this, but at the same time, prevention is a major tool. I do like Mr. Baron-Chong's approach, though, in the sense that making sure there's accountability level on some of the telcos here. I don't think we got to let them off the hook, but perhaps Mr. Cosgrove and Mr. Meacher, what are the things that we can do for unshackle your advocacy to help on prevention? I think that's, you know, I think that's it's a two-way street here for these things.
All right. As far as my advocacy, where I've hit a dead end is basically I'm stuck at the local level. We're dealing with a border city in a town with a university and a college, so we have a very high multicultural population, and I can't even get funding for standard translations. Living in Windsor and with French being our second official language, I don't even have a French copy at the moment. And this is something that I've been involved with for years. It's not something I just started. So this is a problem that I've been trying to crack, and thankfully with MB Brian Massey inviting me for this, it might even provide some opportunities to get this out. Anything that I've done over the years, it's all completely nonprofit. It's all volunteer time. I'm not paid for any appearances, I'm not paid for any of the booklets or publications that are put out. This is solely just nonprofit, and even at that level, it's definitely difficult getting any level of support.
So quickly to Mr. Meacher, but I just want to ask, maybe you can submit your booklet to the clerk, and I'd ask that our committee have that translated, that you have your publication. We can do that here on the Hill. And to Mr. Meacher, can you follow up on this, please?
Okay. So when I was in, some of the frustrations I had when I was in the RCMP have actually carried over, and I'm not surprised. Well, one of the things, it's a passion project I have to try to create awareness. And I've never had any high sense that in myself I'd be able to have a big impact. And it's a term that Kevin used several times, grassroots. But I kept pushing. And most recently, even with our experience with the Western Union matter, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, which was the genesis behind that, in which they basically forced Western Union to hand over in excess of $500 million through a deferred prosecution process. And those funds went to victims of fraud related to Western Union around the world, which is an amazing gift for victims of fraud. But the big problem was getting that information to victims in Canada. The US Federal Trade Commission kept repeating that message, but it did not resonate in Canada. In March, I started repeating their message the best I could on my limited social media platforms, and then having no luck, finally got frustrated and I actually wrote the commissioner of the RCMP both on the 1st of June and the 7th of June, with the view at that point, the end date for the Western Union offer was going to die at the end of June. And unfortunately, my plea went nowhere. Like I explained who I was, the experience I had with victims, my engagement with fraud, and so on. There was no response until close, I believe, to the end of June, at which point it was almost mute. And at which point they basically posted it on the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre website. And the perverse thing at that time, it was posted, I think, on the 26th of June. At that point, it was believed that the offer was going to expire for intake at the end of June. And it was pointless doing that because for any victim, it was going to at least take a week or more to get all their documentation together. But 2 days later, Federal Trade Commission announced there was going to be an extension to the end of August. So the only meaningful access I've had to advance this cause when I engaged Mr. Massey. And then he pushed that forward, and he has a much larger platform than I'll ever have. So I'm very appreciative of that. But what it speaks to, and I try to be as respectful as I can when I say this, the RCMP does not, at the highest level, appreciate fraud or appreciate the impact fraud has on victims of fraud. And that is a current frustration I have now. And it was also a frustration I had when I was actually a member of the RCMP investigating fraud.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meacher and Mr. Massey. I will now turn it over to MP Crum for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Baron-Chong, and then I'll be sharing my time with Ms. Gray. So, Mr. Baron-Chong, you said you were offered $100 compensation from Rogers. Have you ever pursued suing Rogers for damages in civil court?
No, I have not.
Why not?
Well, I had consulted several lawyers. It's interesting because unlike others who had significant kind of financial losses, although some people who have, let's say, credit card frauds, the credit card company or the banks end up kind of recouping that or compensating the folks for that. Other folks who have crypto thefts are still trying to recover that, and many of the people within our groups are trying to recoup between hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. But for me, my theft was it was very insignificantly financial. It was this where they had essentially taken possession of all of my information, tried to extort me with it, and extortion and the kind of psychological distress, the stress of thinking your life is going to be over is something that's very hard to quantify. And therefore, it was just not worth pursuing. This was my form of getting my kind of compensation.
Okay. And the last time you were here, you had what I think is a very practical recommendation when it comes to SIM swapping. I'd just like to read from the minutes here. 2 years ago, you said, let's say your phone is actually legitimately stolen. Then you have to go into a store to actually provide government ID to validate that it's you and that you are executing the port. That sounds like a pretty practical and effective solution. Is that still your recommendation?
That's in the case of a stolen phone. I think there's a bit of a balance here, right? Because the CRTC wants to allow you to easily kind of port your number, right? And so there's actually a rule that they have to execute it within 2.5 hours. My kind of bigger recommendation that doesn't have to just apply to a stolen phone is where we had the text notification that your number has been requested to be ported, and you have to proactively consent, so text back yes, to say that, yes, I am trying to execute that port. For example, when it happened to me, if I would have gotten that text message, I would have been like, at 11 o'clock on, I think it was a Tuesday, would I have executed a port? Absolutely not. And that would have never gone through, and I wouldn't be in front of you today. But that did not exist at the time. Afterwards, the telcos introduced a text where they didn't require the proactive notification. So this was the problem where people thought it was the fraudulent text, ignored it, and they executed the port anyway. So it wasn't until much later that they did. So according to Rogers' website right now, they say that they introduced this practice that I introduced back in 2020 before this committee. So they're saying that it applies now, but again, there's inconsistent practices and things like that. But this proactive notification should help prevent a significant number of these.
Okay, and I will turn things over to my colleague, Ms. Gray.
Great, thank you very much. And my questions are also for Mr. Baron-Chong. You had referenced during your testimony, you referenced your experience with Rogers. And of course, we had Rogers here for an emergency committee meeting this summer. And with the CRTC, it really seemed like they were defending the telecoms instead of being a regulator. And your comment actually was very similar, where you said it seemed like they were standing up for the telecoms. And so I'm wondering if you can just go into that a little bit more in detail. Where really the telecoms should be the CRTC should be holding the telecoms to account and standing up for Canadians, but it seems like it's the other way around. Can you just explain what your comments were a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of wonder whose corner they're in because. As I mentioned, PIAC, and we've been consulting with PIAC quite a bit. We've been trying to get this data, for example. You'd think that macro-level data is not too big of an ask or too much of a threat to security. We were even asking at the telco level, what the data was in terms of what the incidences of SIM swaps were. The CRTC rejected that. The CRTC dismissed that the hearing does not need to occur because the public has no real contribution to helping solve this problem. So the question is the regulator trying to defend the telcos from being embarrassed or from, further legal action? I know a lot of the times when, in the early days of when people were trying to do lawsuits around this, they thought it was one-off incidences. When we heard it was 25,000 cases within that 10-month period, we were shocked. We thought it was in the few thousands or so. But if you think about it, the prevalence and the magnitude of this crime is massive, and we think that they're protecting them because this could be a big, big fraud and completely embarrassing.
Thank you very much, MP Gray and Mr. Baron-Chong. We now have to turn it over to MP Fillmore for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much to the witnesses, and thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring us back to the topic of data, if I could, data in the era of great interest in protecting public privacy, and I'll get us there in this way. So about 6 months ago, I visited the Cyber Center of Excellence in Vancouver. It's embedded in MasterCard. It's a center that this government invested about $50 million in, and they're devising techniques and algorithms that will help to identify fraud during transactions. And I learned things like, in the case of a ported phone or a cloned phone, MasterCard can tell if I normally type holding my phone this way, but someone's pretending to be me holding it this way, or holding it flat instead of up, how hard I'm pushing on the keys, whether I'm using 2 thumbs or 1 finger. It's incredible what some of the techniques that are emerging to figure out if the right person is on the other end of that phone. That's the sort of the bank and the credit card perspective. Then there's the vendors. The vendors are also party to fraud, and they're creating profiles on all of us. What time we shop and what we buy and all that kind of thing. So there are really 3 parties, right? There's the consumer, there's the bank, and then there's the vendor involved in many of these things. And everybody's got data. There's all this data being generated. And perhaps this is maybe to begin with Mr. Meacher, but in your experience, is there adequate feedback mechanisms or data sharing between our CMP, CRTC, the banks, the vendors, Are we doing a good job there? Are there required reporting? Is it required to have fraudulent transactions reported to the RCMP? Is it voluntary by the banks? Just anything on the discussion of data sharing in the era of protection of personal privacy.
I really can't speak to privacy matters. That's really not my niche. But I can say that previously, particularly to banks, banks have been periodically, I say periodically, fully engaged on the fraud fighting front. But at the same time, there have been some banks which have gone the opposite direction and actually were through willful blindness or what have you, have actually assisted fraudsters, but that usually catches up with them.
Is there any requirement on behalf of, let's use the MasterCard example, when they detect a fraudulent transaction, is there a requirement that they inform the RCMP, or is that really a matter between their customer and them?
Honestly, I don't know. I might give you a guess, but I don't want to hedge an answer on a guess.
Okay. Would Mr. Cosgrove or Baron Chong have anything to add on that point?
Sure. Just one thing I would add is that there's a company, a joint venture called Endstream. Endstream is a joint venture of the major telcos. One of the services they offer is identity verification to prevent things like SIM swap fraud. And this is a product that they sell to the banks, because the banks are the ones. So I've spoken to some folks in the cybersecurity teams in the banks, and they know SIM swap fraud well because banks are the ones who ultimately pay for it. They're the ones who are compensating for the credit card losses and the other thefts and things like that. So banks are being sold a product by the telcos where the telcos can help identify frauds. So there's this kind of perverse organization that exists. Some other countries, what they've done is some of the stuff that you're alluding to. They, for example, will kind of block bank transactions after a port. Like there'll be a bit of a freezing window because they know that there's a high risk of things like that. So absolutely, there are kind of connections between banking, telco, and privacy and security and the enabling of these frauds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fillmore.
Sorry.
I'll have to cut you off because we're almost out of time and we still have two questioners. So I'll turn to Mr. Lemire for a short 2-minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've been listening to our witnesses, and I can see that we need to have more legislation for victims. The government tabled a bill, C-27, that says that privacy needs to be protected, and they speak about AI. Do you have an opinion on this bill? Does it go far enough in its recommendations? I'll start with Mr. Bang Chung.
With Bill C-27.
OK. Et monsieur, là, je sais que ça ressemblait à teach.
And Mr. Sorry, I don't have my notes. Mr. Meacher, sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Have you heard of the new bill C-27? Do you think it goes far enough to protect different victims?
No, I haven't.
OK, ben merci.
Okay, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Mr. Mancé.
Teacher, do you feel that a civilian-led attempt to bring the different jurisdictions together would be appropriate at this time, whether it be like to help coordinate? It doesn't have to be aggressive to the RCMP, the CRTC, and the others, but I'm just wondering whether a third party is required to help coordinate the sharing of resources and the sharing of information. Mr. Meacher, did you hear that? Or?
Yeah, I just had technical issue. So anything is worth a try. And I don't think that is entirely unique, that particular approach. It might be beneficial. And the nice thing about having beyond law enforcement, is, I suspect, it'd be a whole lot easier to be transparent.
Mr. Cosgrove, real quickly to you, and then I'm sure I'm out of time. Civilian-led approach.
Yes, absolutely. There is a tendency from the stuff that I see myself, because of course I'm speaking from my own experience, to overcomplicate things, present them, and over formalize some of this information. And if we're looking at seniors as being a severe target of just about any type of fraud, making big formal documents and online bills and everything, they're not aware of this stuff. We need to get down into the trenches and actually resolve this stuff more in person or with just easier information.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Massé.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marcet. Thank you to our witnesses today. We very much appreciate your presence here. I hope you'll have a wonderful week and a wonderful end of your day. And now the meeting is closed. Thank you to our